Hi, everybody. Today I want to talk about something that's really important for what we do, making books, and that is the grain of the material that we utilize. Paper, board, leather, cloth, they all to some degree have what is termed grain. And it's important to understand how that works and how we adapt to that aspect of the materials we're using, because a lot of time we don't have an option. You get a text block, it's already been printed. If the grain runs correctly, that's great. If the grain doesn't run correctly, you still have to deal with it. So you need to understand why this is such an important concept, and that understanding how it works is really pretty crucial what we do. So I'm going to talk about paper first, and that will kind of carry over into the other materials. So paper is composed primarily of cellulose fibers, which you probably already know. And for our purposes now, I want to contextualize it, big word, in a way that's been useful for me teaching over the years. So the easiest way to think about a cellulose fiber is to consider it like a drinking straw. Okay, here's a drinking straw. It's a cylinder of length X and of diameter Y. It's hollow. Now, when you see blow-ups of cellulose fibers, they're all kind of wiggly and they look kind of flat. But essentially, this is, if I could flatten this out, and then you'd have something much more like, a cellulose fiber. Cellulose fibers, depending on their source, have a finite length, which can be significant, or if they're made from sawdust, it can be minimal. The thing we need to understand is that when your cellulose fiber comes in contact with moisture, it grows. Doesn't get longer, but it gets fatter. Okay? This is a dramatic, difference. The real cellulose fiber doesn't expand this much, but this is what you need to understand. Dry, not dry. Okay? Now, so you've got these straws that, depending on the humidity, can be a different diameter. All right. So the next thing that's going to affect it is how the paper is made. All right. Handmade paper is made one sheet at a time on a paper mold with a decal by a paper maker. And when they form the sheet and they pull the decal and the mold out, they shake it this way, and they also shake it this way. So with the handmade sheet, the fibers are being kind of randomly intertwined. And you get something that looks like that. All right. The orientation of the fibers is relatively evenly distributed throughout the sheet, so that when a handmade sheet gets wet, it expands, all the fibers expand, and you get a roughly equal amount of expansion in both directions. All right. So the paper is a handmade sheet, if you take a small piece of handmade paper, damp it on the back side, it will grow all the way around. It will expand height-wise and length-wise. All right. Now, the second kind of paper that we use, the second way of manufacturing paper, is called mold made, which is made on a machine, but it's made one sheet at a time. All right, the German Hahnemühle papers are probably the best known for that. A lot of printmaking papers are mold made. Reeves, I can't think of the other names, but you know, they're made one sheet at a time on a machine. The machine moves relatively slowly. So what happens is there's still a random, there's a less random formation, fiber formation, all right? And so generally with a mold-made sheet, because most of the fibers are going, let's say, this way, you're going to get a little bit of expansion against the grain, or you're going to get a little expansion with the grain and the most expansion across the grain, all right? With machine-made paper on a paper-making machine, which is basically an endless belt of metal mesh that runs from me to you and then kind of has a little vibration, you know, from side to side. Most of the fibers are going to align in the machine direction. All right, some of them will be aligned in, you know, across the sheet, but primarily the fibers are going to align in the direction the machine is going fastest. So with machine-made paper, you get the most expansion across the grain, and it's really can be significant and obvious. So it helps, you know, if you understand that the material that you're acquiring, you know, how the paper that you're acquiring to do your work with has been made, so that you understand, you know, before you even get to it, how much grain the paper will likely have. Now, there are ways, once you get your paper, there are ways to tell the grain. Here I have a sheet of just, you know, machine-made paper, 8.5 by 11. I got it for the shop. This is my letterhead, one of the papers I use for the letterhead. Now I have to find my brush, which somebody has stolen. That somebody being a cat. So I'll grab another brush. And there are several ways to determine the grain of a piece of paper. This is a little destructive, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of moisture, a little bit of water on one side of the sheet, and watch what happens. Can you see that? See how it starts to curl? All right, it's the fibers on the wet side are expanding faster than the fibers on the dry side, and it's curling away from the wet side. Okay, so that's one way to tell. You can use saliva if you want, you know, just on the corner of the sheet. Just make sure you kind of mark once you're done, you know, which way the grain's going. This is another destructive way of finding grain, is if you tear it. You can see that tears pretty straight. This doesn't. Okay, so grain across the grain. Again, it's going to, you know, if I pasted out or glued out this piece of paper, it would get wider, but not particularly taller. All right. The way, it's not the easiest way, but the least destructive way and method that is good to get in hand is by flexing the sheet. So if I flex this sheet this way, okay, and then I flex it this way, you can feel the difference. There's more resistance across the grain, and it's really hard for it's hard to see, but I can feel that this fights me more than this. In fact, you can kind of see how it wants to just doesn't mind, coming together here, a little more resistance. Okay, so the grain on this sheet runs vertically. Now you say, why does this matter? Well, if you think about it, when you bind a book, you are, by sewing it, gluing it, and putting it into a case, you're restricting how much the paper can move at the spine. All right. So now I know the paper in the grain goes correctly, so you can see how it lays over. If this were cross grain, it would want to stand up more, and if the book was in a humid environment, you would see a lot of cockling along the foredge. The thing is that cockling, that the paper at the spine can't expand, so it's going to expand, kind of this way, which is not good for it, quite frankly. A book printed cross grain will not open as well. It will, again, as it tries to expand and contract with the changes in the ambient atmosphere, the paper at the foredge can move, paper at the spine can't. Okay, and this in the long run can help things break down a lot faster. All right. Board also has a grain and needs to be considered. Again, you basically take a full-size sheet of binder's board, flex it each way, and one way, generally the long way, but not necessarily, it'll flex a little easier. So you mark that with your pencil immediately. You mark the whole sheet. Then when you cut it up, you still have the marks on it. All right. This gets to be a little more crucial because if you think about it, again, this is a full paper binding. So there's paper on the outside, paper on the inside. As time goes on, the board, it's a little hard to show you. Oh, there we go. The board, and in fact, you can see that the board is pulling in a little bit, which is a good thing. You want, ultimately, if it has to go one way or the other, you want it to pull in so that it kind of hugs the book. If the grain were going in the other direction in this board or the paper, it would be doing this. And actually, let me do this. There's the spine, okay? Stand up. Here's the spine. And if you think about it, think about 40 or 50 years of the boards doing this, as opposed to 40 or 50 years of the boards doing this. And I think it's fairly obvious that over time, let's do it this way. All right. Oh, sorry. This is going to really stress the connection between the text block and the cover. It's the same thing with the book bound in boards, which is to say, with laced on boards. So you need to understand that the grain is crucial for the longevity of the book. Now, with handmade paper, it becomes a little less of an issue because handmade paper is always going to expand in all directions. So yes, it is going to, expand across grain, but it's also going to expand with the grain and contract. So you need to know the grain of your materials, and you need to understand that they must run parallel to the spine of the book to give the book as much longevity as possible. Okay. I saw something on my notes. Contract, yada, yada, yada. No, spine. Yeah. you'll find that, as I said earlier, the paper folds easier with the grain than against the grain. Sometimes you'll need to score across the grain. A couple of other things to be aware of. Thin paper, let me step back. So you've got the grain. When you apply your adhesive, it's going to expand, whether it is all the way around for handmade, a little bit more for mold made, and a lot more across the grain for machine made. But it's also then, when it dries, the fibers are going to go back to their original size. So they're going to shrink. And that's where pull comes from. All right, because the paper was wider, and then as it dries, it wants to get narrower, but it has to take whatever you've adhered it to. So, it's got to do that. And rule of thumb is that thin paper pulls more than thick paper. All right, so if you have a thinner sheet on the inside, that's going to pull more than the thicker material that you have on the outside. And again, it's going to, ultimately these things will come to equilibrium, and they'll either be totally flat, which almost never happens. It will pull in, or it will pull out. All right. And one of the ways to ensure that your work does what you intended to is to be very familiar with your materials. Use it a lot, see what happens. Keep in mind that if you have, like this book has this actually has the same paper on the inside and the outside, although this is a paste paper on the outside. But I used the same Hahnemuhle paper to keep it relatively balanced. You can see I put you can see we've been talking about this. This pulls in. For this, I used the Concept glue on the outside, paste on the inside. Paste on the inside means the inside paper is going to pull a little more, and it's going to warp it this way, rather than having the outside paper pull more and then having it, I don't know if I can do it, having it yawn this way, which is less desirable. So thin pulls more than thick. Paper tends to pull more than cloth. Depending how you use your leather, leather can actually expand quite a bit and then contract, so you have to take that into consideration. Now, interestingly enough, grain in cloth doesn't seem to be such a huge problem. The cloths in general, and again, a place where my ignorance is going to show here, but they tend to not expand so differentially as differentially as paper does. Leather, if you're pasting it, it will expand in all directions. There are ways to deal with that, but those are this is kind of the minimal amount that you need to understand about the materials, paper, board, cloth, leather that we work with. But this is kind of important stuff to understand deeply. I mean, this is kind of riding a bike stuff. You really need to internalize this so that as you work, you can make informed decisions on on structure and on how you tailor your use of adhesives to get the final result that you're looking for. So I can't think of anything else right off the top of my head. This is all about grain. If you have any questions, please, pop them up in the comments. And again, thanks to everybody who's, viewed these little snippets here and there. I'm very grateful, and I hope that you've gotten something out of it. So thanks again, and I will be back.